Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's bombed the last functioning hospital in the northern Gaza Strip, killing a child who asphyxiated from a lack of oxygen and leaving sick and wounded Palestinians on the street with nowhere to go for treatment. The assault on the Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in Gaza City came during a weekend of relentless artillery and missile attacks that killed and injured scores of Palestinians. Overnight, an Israeli airstrike killed an entire family of 10 in Khan Yunis, including children as young as 3 years old. In Deir al-Balah, mourners gathered Sunday to honor 6 brothers killed when an Israeli strike hit their car. Their father, Zaki Abu Mahdi, said his sons were delivering food and water to Palestinians left hungry by Israel's total siege on Gaza, which is now in its 7th week.
After the war began, they started volunteering to prepare meals for people in need. They don't carry weapons. They're not resistance fighters. They're civilians. The 10-year-old child was out helping his brothers just to get something to eat under this siege. Why would you do this to them? What did they do wrong?
In Israel, over 1,600 former Israeli paratroopers, soldiers, and intelligence agents have signed a letter demanding a ceasefire deal that would see the release of all remaining hostages, even if that means an end to Israel's assault on Gaza. The open letter reads, in part, quote, "We identify with the assertion that, at this time, the war serves mainly political and personal interests rather than security interests," unquote. Yemen's Houthis say overnight U.S. airstrikes killed at least 7 people, wounding 29 others. The continued U.S. attacks came after Israel's military set it down 2 ballistic missiles fired from Yemen that triggered air raid sirens across Israel. World leaders have condemned a Russian attack on the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine Sunday that killed 34 people and injured 117 others. 2 children were among the dead. Witnesses say a pair of ballistic missiles struck Sumy's city center as crowds were gathering to celebrate the Palm Sunday holiday.
When the explosion happened, my mother was in the kitchen cooking some food for lunch. Please have a look. A cupboard was right here. Now it lies here on the floor. It fell and its doors cut her head.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz accused Russia of serious war crimes. French President Emmanuel Macron said Russia showed blatant disregard for human lives and international law. President Donald Trump called the attack on Sumy terrible, but said he was, quote, told it was a mistake. In Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the attack showed Russia is not interested in negotiating a ceasefire.
Wars only end when war crimes are not forgotten and when the aggressor is met with enough pressure. This is not happening now. Last Friday marked 1 month since Russia rejected the American proposal of a full, unconditional ceasefire. They feel no fear, and that's why there are missiles. That's why there are 100 combat drones each night.
On Friday, U.S. and Ukrainian officials met to discuss President Trump's proposal to secure mineral rights worth hundreds of billions of dollars in exchange for U.S. military aid. Reuters reports the latest draft includes a demand that the U.S. government's International Development Finance Corporation take control of a major pipeline used to send Russian natural gas to Europe. The Trump administration's terminating temporary protected status, known as TPS, for immigrants from Cameroon and Afghanistan living in the U.S. The move affects some 14,600 Afghans and around 7,900 Cameroonians who would be forced to leave the U.S. by May and June, respectively. The Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE, California, said, quote, "These individuals have fled war, persecution, and instability, and in the case of many Afghans, risked their lives to support U.S. operations. This decision will separate families and force people into the shadows." An immigration judge ruled Friday abducted Columbia graduate Mahmoud Khalil can be deported for taking part in student protests against Israel's war on Gaza. The government's removal case against Khalil will continue in Louisiana, while a separate case in a federal court in New Jersey proceeds, challenging the Trump administration's claims it can remove people whose, quote, beliefs, statements, or associations, unquote, it deems counter to foreign policy interests. Protesters took to the streets of New York City Saturday.
I thought that our democracy is under threat, that we are supposed to live in a country where people have rights, where people have First Amendment rights, have the right to freedom of speech, have the right to protest, have the right to take the streets. And I thought that this is under attack. If they can come for Mahmoud, then they can come for any of us.
We'll have the latest on Mahmoud Khalil's case after headlines with one of his lawyers. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports the State Department found no evidence linking Tufts University student Ramesa Ozturk to anti-Semitic activities or public statements in support of terrorism before masked agents in plain clothes abducted her on the street in Somerville, Massachusetts, March 25th. The Post reports a State Department memo determined Secretary of State Marco Rubio did not have sufficient grounds for revoking Ozturk's visa, contradicting public accusations made by the Trump administration. The 30-year-old doctoral student from Turkey remains jailed at a privately run ICE detention center in Louisiana. El Salvador's authoritarian president, Nayib Bukele, is visiting the White House today. On Sunday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said 10 more people were removed to El Salvador, claiming they were gang members. Nearly 300 people who were flown out of the U.S. since mid-March are now believed to be detained at the notorious Secot mega prison. Most of them are Venezuelan nationals, many of them sent there simply on the basis of having tattoos, despite experts asserting this is not a sign of membership in the Tren de Aragua gang. On Saturday, the State Department told a judge Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland father who was abducted to Secot prison as an administrative error, is alive and still detained in El Salvador. A judge last week ordered the Trump administration to return him home to Maryland. We'll have more on his story with the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Maria Hinojosa, who attempted to get into Secot when she was just in El Salvador. In more immigration news, a judge ruled ICE can carry out raids on places of worship siding with the Trump administration. Over 24 faith groups sought to block the policy, which they say violates the right of individuals to practice their religion. The Trump administration's exempted smartphones, computers, semiconductors, and other electronics from its sweeping 145% tariffs on Chinese goods. The exemption came amidst backlash over reports that Trump's trade war could increase the cost of Apple's latest iPhone by as much as $675. A new survey by University of Michigan researchers finds U.S. consumer confidence has plunged to its second lowest level on record. This comes amidst mounting evidence that Trump and his associates used insider knowledge to profit from stock market volatility set off by Trump's on-again, off-again tariffs. Video from the Oval Office last Wednesday showed Trump bragging about his friend, the investor Charles Schwab, making billions of dollars from market swings.
This is Charles Schwab. It's not just a company, it's actually an individual. And he made $2.5 billion today, and he made $900 million.
On Sunday, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren called for the Securities and Exchange Commission to launch an investigation.
It's entirely appropriate to have an investigation to make sure that Donald Trump, Donald Trump's family, Donald Trump's inner circle didn't get advance information and trade on that information.
The Trump administration is preparing deep cuts to NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, in its latest assault on climate science. Internal budget documents call for $1.7 billion in cuts to NOAA's $4.5 billion budget, with zero funding for climate, weather, and ocean laboratories. The Trump administration has proposed fully eliminating Head Start, the program created during President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty that offers free child care to over 1 million low-income parents. That's according to USA Today, which reports cuts would also end meals, developmental screenings, and health care for nearly 800,000 children. This comes after a federal judge Friday ruled Elon Musk's Doge operation can access sensitive payment and data systems at the Treasury Department. 19 state attorneys general had sued to block access to the systems, which include bank account and Social Security information. In California, an estimated 36,000 people gathered in downtown Los Angeles Saturday for a fighting oligarchy tour organized by Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders.
We're fighting a president who undermines our Constitution every day and threatens our freedom of speech and assembly, and whose agents are rounding up innocent people off the streets, putting them in unmarked vans and throwing them in detention centers. That is what happens in dictatorships, not democracies. And we're going to stop that outrageous action on the part of the president.
Senator Sanders was joined by New York Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Los Angeles. On Saturday evening, Sanders made a surprise appearance on stage at the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, where he drew standing ovations as he called on people to fight for reproductive rights, workers' rights, access to health care, and to oppose Trump's authoritarianism. Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa won re-election in a runoff vote Sunday, according to preliminary results, but his leftist rival, Luis González, is challenging the official results, which show Noboa with a lead of nearly 12 points.
One of the exit polls gave us victory. None showed a difference like the one we are seeing at the Electoral Council. None. Therefore, I report, before my people, before the media, before the world, that Ecuador is experiencing a dictatorship. We are facing the worst and most grotesque electoral fraud in the history of the Republic of Ecuador.
Noboa is a businessman and heir to a banana industry fortune who's made cracking down on crime his main priority. He's been condemned for skirting legal norms in the process, including declaring a state of internal armed conflict to more easily deploy the military. He declared another state of emergency on the eve of Sunday's election, barring protests and other gatherings and authorizing warrantless searches. In Gabon, Brice Oligui Nguema has won an 8-way race for the presidency by a landslide after an election on Saturday. Nguema led the 2023 military coup that deposed longtime authoritarian President Ali Bongo, whose family ruled Gabon for over half a century. Gabon is rich in oil, but has one of Africa's highest rates of inequality, with over half of rural voters living in poverty. Back in the United States, Pennsylvania authorities have arrested and charged a man suspected of setting fire to Governor Josh Shapiro's home while he and his family were asleep inside on Sunday morning. Shapiro and his family were safely evacuated. Governor Shapiro spoke following the incident.
This type of violence is not okay. This kind of violence is becoming far too common in our society.
The suspect said he'd been planning to beat Shapiro with a hammer if he encountered him. Authorities said they found a sledgehammer. The threat is drawing comparisons to the 2022 invasion of Congressmember Nancy Pelosi's San Francisco home by a far-right attacker who assaulted Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, with a hammer. In South Carolina, a firing squad shot and killed a death row prisoner on Friday. Witnesses report Mikal Mahdi cried out when multiple bullets struck him. He groaned twice and continued breathing for 80 seconds before taking a final gasping breath. It's the second time South Carolina used the firing squad in the past 5 weeks. And over 1,000 people rallied in Cambridge, Massachusetts to demand Harvard resist the Trump administration's threats of withholding $9 billion in federal funding. Trump warned he would take the money away unless the university eliminates DEI programming and suppresses pro-Palestinian voices. Harvard professors sued the Trump administration last week over the threat. This is a Harvard senior from Sweden at Saturday's protest.
I have talked to so many friends who were scared of just showing up today because we have seen our friends get their visas revoked, get detained, and potentially deported. So the self-silencing that is happening right now is really, really scary, and that is what we have to stand up against. I think that there is no more dangerous response to authoritarianism than self-silencing.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.